Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. For those of you who have joined us this morning, I hope you had a chance to connect, reflect, and enjoy the lovely lunch and the student showcase. I was there during lunchtime, and it was busy. There was a lot of action going on, so thank you all for those that went to the posters and engaged with the students. And the amazing posters, every time I go around looking at the posters, it is a joy. I'm going to present today the Collaborative Water Program Alumni Achievement Award. Most of you know this already, but the Collaborative Water Program brings together graduate students from across the universities, from the natural sciences and engineering, as well as the social sciences, to learn and work together. And through that process, you learn through your peers. Through that process, students gain both a community and understanding of shared work, shared research, shared relationships. And this is Collaborative Water Program started many years ago now, and I started my journey at University of Waterloo right around the same time. And since then, it has been amazing to see how much it helps people grow by talking to people that they are not familiar with, have different languages, different ways of thinking about things. Water doesn't follow boundaries, and that's what the Collaborative Water Program embodies. Each year, the Collaborative Water Program presents an Alumni Achievement Award. And this award is about impact that this alumni has made moving forward in the world, and impact in the space of innovation, water innovation, equity, working across disciplines, community engagement in meaningful ways. It is also a reminder that many of you who are Collaborative Water Program graduates right now, that your journey in this space, in this water space, and as a part of this community, is just starting. And you're always a part of this community, and this is kind of a way to recognize and bring back those that have been a part of this community some time back. So with that, I would love to present this award this year to one of my former students, Frederick Cheng, who was one of the second or the third cohort of the Collaborative Water Program students, very closely engaged with SWIGS. Fred was an undergraduate here at Waterloo in the environmental engineering program, and then he stayed on here for his master's and a PhD with me. A lot of you know that that's not what always people advise to say, but I'm glad Fred stayed. And I'm glad that gave me the opportunity to see him grow, both as a researcher, but as a person. Fred is one of those rare people who bring together curiosity, depth, and kindness. He asks thoughtful questions, he listens, and he genuinely cares about his work and about the people that are around him. And outside of research, he's also a ballroom dancer. He was very active in the ballroom dancing community and went around winning competitions, which I think tells you something, both about his discipline and his ability to move between worlds with ease. And yes, as his advisor, I will also take a moment to brag. When Fred graduated from here after his postdoc, in a world where faculty offers is not most common, he had multiple faculty offers to choose from, and he chose University of Virginia, where he's now an assistant professor in one of the top environmental science programs in the world. It's been a real privilege to be a part of his journey and to see where he has taken it.
Guess I'm supposed to say something now. Wow. Well, first off, good afternoon, and thank you, Nanita, for this generous introduction and for this incredible honor from the Water Institute. It really means a lot for me to come back to somewhere that really shaped who I am today after being here for over a decade, essentially. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my path here and what I'm doing now, just to see for the students thinking about your next steps in your career. So how I got into water research and education, to be completely honest, I didn't envision myself going into water research. I did my undergraduate here or degree here. I was ready to go out and tackle the world as an engineering consultant and just do whatever I wanted to do. But it was actually a really big stroke of luck when during my last co-op term here, I was desperate for a work placement, and I contacted Nandita. I've never had her as a professor or actually interacted at all, but I was so lucky that she took a chance on me. I don't think you knew me at all at that time, but that really spurred on the next couple stages of my academic career. It was really by chance that happened, but I do, to this day, blame her for igniting my passion and interest in water research during that time, and that really was what spurred me on to stay here to work with her and to pursue a graduate degree at University of Waterloo. And I was very lucky that the collaborative water program was basically just starting. I was in the second cohort of the program, and wow, that really changed how I saw and tackled problems today. Coming out of my undergraduate degree, I was trained as an environmental engineer, physical scientist. You kind of go about into the world thinking well, I can solve the world's water problems if you just put me there and we have the technology and solutions. Well, that's not true, right? With the CWP, being able to interact with so many people from across disciplines and different perspectives really opened my eyes to say that it's not a matter of better models, better data, better technology that's going to solve the world's problems, but it's the better integration, communication, and really collaboration across the different disciplines that's going to have that impactful solutions and for our future in the water, right? So really, I do think that for the students here who are going through the CWP, really take chances, get to know each other. It doesn't matter that you might not understand how one student from a different discipline tackles water. In the real world, you have to work with all of them. So it's really important for us to do that. So I just wanted to highlight kind of the things that I've learned from there and how I use it today. In my current work, I still work a lot about quantifying and thinking about wetland management. These are, in my mind, highly overlooked, undervalued, and increasingly under threat. But they have a really large role in providing various services to the ecosystem as well as to society. So whether it's purifying our water, whether it's buffering floods or providing just a whole slew of different ecosystem functions, they're important. But because it's really easy to overlook, they're not often recognized as model ecosystems, or they're not like the fancy infrastructure that we build. So we need to, put some effort and highlight the role of these wetlands in our water resources. So a lot of my current work right now is interacting with a whole range of people. It's with scientists, with policymakers, stakeholders, but even the everyday community members. So just last week, we had a really large stakeholder meeting to really try to co-develop and really think about how do we move knowledge to action. And a lot of that was inspired by the work that we did in the CWP program back in the day over here. So just to kind of wrap this up, I think this award really reflects the work of a whole community of people. And first and foremost, I want to thank my advisor, a longtime advisor and friend and colleague now, Nandi Debasu, as well as the multiple people in our research group that really spurred on our work in science. For example, Kim Van Meter, who is an amazing scientist as well. And also, because we're here, because of the Collaborative Water Program, all of my colleagues, my cohort, not just the advisors, but everyone else that went through the program was really instrumental in shaping of how I think about the world today. So I think with that, I really want to thank, again, for this honor, and it's been a really good privilege to be an alumni of the Waterloo Collaborative Water Program. Thanks.
Hello. Wait, sorry. Hello? This is on? Okay. Hi. Okay, yeah. Congratulations again to Fred. As a current collaborative water program, it's really inspiring to see the successes of the alumni. So that makes me really happy. So this afternoon, we're thrilled to invite to the stage a group of researchers whose work spans the intersection of gender, race, class, and water issues for a panel on water equity and shared responsibility, intersectional perspectives from research and practice. So their discussion will explore how intersections of gender, race, class, and other social factors shape unequal access to safe drinking water, sanitation, health, and safety. So first, I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel, Dr. Susan J. Elliott. So Dr. Elliott is a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management and University Research Chair in Medical Geography at the University of Waterloo. Dr. Elliott's research spans the built environment, socially constructed risks, and the physical environment's effects on health, emphasizing gender and water in sub-Saharan Africa. So let's please give a round of applause to Dr. Susan Elliott, who will come up and introduce the rest of the panel.
This one? Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. I can't express enough how well organized these sessions have been today, and that's because the students are running it with tremendous help from the Water Institute staff, but they're doing an amazing job. And I hope you're able to join us this morning for the talk by Katie Meehan, because for me, one of the most important take-home messages from that is that water insecurity happens everywhere. So this is my tagline. I've got 3 minutes to tell you who I am and what I do. This is my tagline, 3 through 6 by 5. SDG 3, health and well-being for all. Everybody wants that. But we're never going to have that until we have water and sanitation for all, which is SDG 6. And in my view, this is my opinion, we're not going to have either of those until we at least first address SDG 5, which is empowering women. So here are the things that define my research program in water. First of all, you can't do water without sanitation. Women spend 250 million hours daily searching for and fetching water globally. That's a lot of time. They also spend 260 million hours daily searching for a place to go to the bathroom. That's just as, if not more important. March 22nd is World Water Day. When is World Toilet Day? Anybody know? Hands up. Well done, you. November 19th. Every year. But we don't celebrate World Toilet Day the way that we celebrate World Water Day, and yet the UN does, right? You can't talk about water without also talking about water sanitation. Secondly, water, sanitation, and hygiene is not just a problem for the Global South. We saw that this morning definitively. This is a field site of mine in Uganda. This is Kenya. This is a sanitation facility. These are some of our First Nations communities. These photos were shared with me by the AFN. These are our First Nations communities in Canada. 1% of the Canadian population does not have access to safe water and sanitation. And it's primarily our Indigenous communities. We heard about the boil water advisories this morning. It's just not right. Here's two photographs I want to share with you. On your left is me in the bathroom at the Woodland Cultural Center. Anybody been to Woodland Cultural Center? Yeah. a really, really striking spot of one of the most longest standing residential schools in Canada, and there's a wonderful museum there and a gift shop. And I went into the bathroom just as I was leaving. It's right in Six Nations, and I see this sign on the mirror, "Don't drink the water." That was last year. 2 days ago, this is an article in my local newspaper that this high school in Hamilton has the highest lead levels of any school in Canada, in my community. So it doesn't just happen in the Global South. And it's not just what we do, but how we do it. This also defines my work. So these are the principles for doing global health research defined by the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. So they're centered on equity, and we talk about authentic partnering, inclusion, shared benefits, commitment to the future, responsiveness to causes of inequalities, and for me, what's the most important, which is humility. Being a humble researcher in a place where you don't know what's going on and you don't understand what's going on, but you want to try and do your best. If you want to learn more about that, you can read about it in social science and medicine. But following those principles is how I learned about violence in the context of water security, particularly violence against women and girls. This is Patience. Patience was sent to get water first thing in the morning in Uganda, in a rural community. It was still dark outside. She goes early so she can try and jump the queue and get to the front of the queue and not have to wait a long time. Patience was raped. She was 14 years old. She didn't want to tell her family. She ended up giving birth to the baby, and she and the baby are fine, we're fine. But this is not an unusual occurrence. This is a school in Ghana where I stood beside the headmaster who was pointing out these wonderful new sanitation facilities put in by UNICEF. And he told me how wonderful this was, because there's great sanitation facilities there now for boys and girls, particularly girls who reach menstruation age. And then he turned and pointed to a grove of trees on the other side of this plot of land and said, before we had these, that's where adult men would wait for the young girls to go and relieve themselves during the school day. And so 3 through 6 via 5, this is just a paper that shows the evidence of the role of education in women and girls and links to water security. And so that's my tagline, 3 through 6 via 5. It's my job now to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Abraham Numbogu. He's a research fellow at UNU Inwe, which is the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, where he investigates how social and environmental factors, especially gender, shape water, sanitation, and hygiene behaviors and influence health and well-being in the Global South. His work focuses on strengthening WASH interventions and understanding how communities adapt to water insecurity in climate-vulnerable regions. He holds a PhD in Geography and Environmental Management from the University of Waterloo, because I supervised him, and I'm very proud of that. And he's going to come and talk about himself for a couple of minutes. Abraham.
Thank you, Suzanne, for the wonderful introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. Okay, I'm a health geographer by training with interdisciplinary educational background in urban planning from Ghana, spatial planning from the Netherlands, then health geography in Canada. And having lived and studied in 3 different continents, my research is shaped by a place-sensitive and an equity and feminist lens. All these shaped how I approach my research and ask questions. So because of this lived experience over the years, I have several research interests spanning from WASH at the intersection of gender. The United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health is one of the 13 institutes under the United Nations University, which is the academic arm of the United Nations. And as the UN think tank on water, the UNU Inwe, that's the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, bridges the gap between science and policy. So we try to make science accessible to policymakers, focusing on low and middle income countries than the UN member states. So at UNU INWE, I lead and also participate in some projects. The first is the Critical Minerals, Water Insecurity and Justice project. And I think most of us are carrying phones in our pocket, so it means we are all carrying critical minerals in our pocket. This is a sensitive issue, but the current extractive trajectory is contributing to water insecurity, livelihood disruptions, and health risks in most of the world's vulnerable communities. So on this project, we try to bring to light some of the injustices that these communities or countries are facing. For example, let's take the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. About 73% of the population live on less than $3 a day. But DRC contributes to about 60% of the global cobalt production. Let's look at it. How long will it take the 74% or 73% of the population to even get an iPhone or a smartphone? Yet, about 64% of these population do not have basic access to water. So it means they either get water from the well or they use surface water. But most of us in this part of the world do not see. Sometimes we hear, but because we do not see, we don't understand what is happening when it comes to critical minerals extraction, because most of these narratives are marked under the global mantra of sustainable development or sustainable transition. Climate change is also exacerbating water insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa. So the Basin Project is pioneering a new agenda in Africa, drawing on African experience to inform behavioral change. This is because most of the concepts and models on behavioral change are from the West. So we term it as weird, but that was used to influence or support behavioral change adaptation in Africa. So now, using African-owned stories, we are developing a model that will support behavioral adaptation when it comes to water security. And at UNU, we are leading the behavioral or capacity building, so we are developing a series of courses which will be released this year, so check out for that. And currently, I'm also leading the Global Water Security Assessment. And those of us into water research might have heard of the JMP progress on WASH, but this one goes beyond the parameters that are being used by JMP. We'll track access and progress towards a secured water world, also identifying hotspots where policy interventions should be directed. And you might have heard of the Global Water Bankruptcy Report. Have you heard of it? Good. So it's also a project I contributed to, and this year we'll be releasing an update on that, so look out for that. For this year, World Water Day is Gender and Water, but learning from Susan, we have to scale up the invisible. And that means the bodies that are served as infrastructure, we all know without these bodies, that's women bodies, most households will not have access to water. And we shouldn't focus on only the individual level. We have to also look at how community structures sometimes create these spaces for inequalities when it comes to water or wash. And also how these inequalities are created or shaped by political decisions at the international, national, or sometimes at the municipal level. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Abraham. That was amazing. And now it's my tremendous pleasure to introduce our neighbor, Dr. Sheri Longboat. It's an associate professor in geography and environmental studies at Wilfrid Laurier University, just across the street. She's Mohawk Ukrainian and member of the Six Nations of the Grand River. She's been working with First Nations for over 25 years, and her interdisciplinary research focuses on water security, management, and governance, grounded in issues of sustainability and justice for change.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, back where actually my journey started. I actually did my undergrad here in ERS and geography, back in the 80s, 90s. So it's nice to be back. Does anybody recognize maybe these pictures, these areas? Anyone from the Hamilton, Burlington area? Port Dover even? Is that Port Dover? Oh, maybe it is. I visited a lot of piers. This is where my story begins with respect to where my research is and where it's grounded and how I got to where I am today. I was born and raised in East Hamilton to a Mohawk father with grandparents from Tyendinaga and Six Nations. And my mother was Ukrainian, second generation Ukrainian. And that's part of who I am, my positionality as more of a social science interdisciplinary researcher. Now that's become more and more prominent and important, particularly in the academy, when we're representing First Nations peoples and Indigenous views and knowledge in our research. So my journey, and growing up in Hamilton, being next to the water, connected to the water, was always a part of my life. Whether it be walking it, fishing it, smelt fishing down on the pier in the harbor at the end of summer, it was just a part of our lives. And I didn't realize at that time how connected I was until I moved to a landlocked area like Waterloo. But my very inspiration and passion at that time is what drove me to study geography and environmental studies. I was passionate about learning about the physical world and passionate about learning about water and resources and management and protecting. So that led me actually to the University of Waterloo here, where I did my studies here. I was a physical geographer. I was really passionate about physical geography, wanted to know that component. And it led me to then a master's in coastal geomorphology down the road, where I am now. And then later, as I'll mention, what drove me to do the research that I do now. After graduating from university, the first time part of my journey then, I came equipped, I should say. I have left with I got a degree now, I got a master's degree, now I went to teacher's college, and I'm going to work. My community calls. They said, look, you've got a degree in geography. We need to do some mapping. We're mapping our traditional territories, 974,000 acres, 6 nations, 6 miles either side of the Grand River, traditional territory for litigation against Canada and Ontario for the Haldimand Tract, for monies owing. So it began a journey into working at Six Nations, and my very first job working in my community, learning about me, who I was, the histories I wasn't taught. You're very fortunate where you are now in academia. We're in a different world than we were in the 90s, and you're learning more about Indigenous peoples, knowledge systems, collaboration, history, shared journeys. So my journeys at that time as a consultant to know about my background was practical. I was going to First Nations, helping with their mapping, training in GIS. Sometimes we'd just spend time in the fire hall or the garage, wherever we could gather, and we worked together. I trained people how to go out and collect data, and they come in, we put them into maps, they developed teams, and it supported a lot of different projects. But in reciprocity, I learned so much. That knowledge that now I became equipped, and it humbled me. You said humbled earlier, and it humbled me to what my life and my research could be. But during that time, as I was doing wildlife mapping or medicine mapping or land use or supporting land claims, what was common against all communities were the struggles under colonial policies and the inability that many communities, that was mentioned earlier, couldn't drink safe water. Here we are, I learned we have 1/5 of the world's fresh water, but go to Brantford, cross the reserve, you can't drink the water, and still can't. We've learned that there's geogenetic and other reasons as well, but primarily policy. So when I was going back to university, now I'm in my later 30s, I'm going to go back to school. I went to study resource management. My PhD was in First Nations water security and collaborative governance. Because at that point, I realized we have the science, we have the knowledge as it was shared, we need policy change. Part of me feels like I finished that over 10 years ago and we're still there, but we're moving ahead. So my current research is where I am now. When I first started taking a faculty position, I had no intentions of being a professor. I said, I just want to get my PhD so I could sit at those policy tables that I was sitting at, but often felt, maybe it was my own personal way, tokenized as being an Indigenous rep that can talk about how to map or develop the geospatial database for Canada, the CGDI and GeoBase, and some of the materials we work on now. But sitting there, I went, you know what, I need the PhD to be heard. But as I began doing that and got into academia, began working with students and sharing and learning, I thought this is a place for me. But I'm going to ground it in that knowledge, what I learned, and the learning that I didn't learn in school, that I wanted to be a vehicle for others to begin to learn that. So my work continues. I was in a planning school. We were doing a lot of planning work, working with professional planners, looking at land use planning, land and resource management, visiting. Recently, we've traveled across the country. We have a contract with Indigenous Services Canada to visit First Nations across Canada to hear about their water and security. And not their infrastructure water. This is the other population that isn't even talked about when we talk about water crisis. And those are that have wells, septic beds, or their coping mechanism is to have cisterns filled. That sometimes they don't even have to fill them because water seeps in, but that's all they have. So we went across, did a 300-page report, submitted it to Indigenous Services this past year. Now we're working on actionizing on some of our own research. But my research spanned different areas too in the past. I did some work with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy on joint stewardship. We did a report for the Global Water Commission on braiding knowledge systems, or weaving, or bringing together. Those kind of terms that academics fight over, what are we really doing? Nonetheless, though, we came and did a very comprehensive systematic review to say, how do we do this in practice? Because that seems to be, we know what we need to do, and how do we do it? And that's from both sides. I'm saying both sides, both sort of science and community. It's how do we come together? So that's where I position my work. Done some work in mining and gender inequity, responding to the murdered missing Indigenous women's inquiry, where there was a call for action for extractive industries, and we ended up doing a edited book in there. And my chapter with my students was on gender, understanding the woman's perspective and how those impact community and individuals. And that's where I am now, doing water, kind of supervising students and still working in that space. So my journey was not linear, and I say that for those that maybe don't know where you're going yet. Take the opportunities and find out, because I never thought when I took that first job in 1996 that I'd still be in that space or that that would be transitional. So lots to share, happy to answer questions. I hope I didn't take too much time.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Sheri. Thank you so much. You're more of a neighbor than I thought you were. I was born on the mountain and lived in Hamilton all my life.
East End.
Hamilton shapes you, man.
Yeah.
Our last speaker, last but certainly not least, Alexa Bennett's a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on understanding equitable access to water in low-resource contexts and its implications for public health and well-being. She's currently investigating how water scarcity shapes maternal and newborn health in informal gold mining regions in Ghana.
Well, I'm very excited to be here today to share my perspectives as a graduate student studying water. My interest in water security developed through various opportunities that I had to travel, study, and work internationally. I actually began my career as a high school teacher in Toronto, but between my teaching contracts, I would take on research placements and internships abroad. And it was during 6 months that I spent working in Kenya with unhoused children that I felt my career trajectory starting to change. I was really moved by the inequities in global child health that I saw were often linked to inadequate water and sanitation. And I noticed that these issues were entirely preventable. And so that experience really led me to McMaster, where I studied global health. And while I was there, I took the opportunity to study water from every possible angle, not just within my discipline, but beyond. I think I've sampled E. coli more times than most social scientists have at this point. I also coordinated a program called WASH Canada, which is a research and training program across 8 Canadian universities that brings together researchers who specialize in water and sanitation in low resource contexts. I was just saying a common thread across all of these experiences has been a question, and that's how do we ensure universal access to clean water and sanitation for all people? Or in other words, how do we actually achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6? And so I've continued to ask this question throughout my doctoral degree, where I'm now a PhD student at the University of Waterloo, where I study how people experience and engage with water in their daily lives. In many ways, I've also come full circle because I now teach undergraduates about water through international field courses, much like some of those experiences that led me on my path to water. Recently, my doctoral research brought me to Ghana, West Africa, which has been experiencing a water crisis linked to illegal small-scale gold mining. Many people engage in these activities out of necessity in regions characterized by high levels of poverty. However, at the same time, it can cause widespread destruction of ecosystems and water resources. So the aerial shot here just shows an example of a community circled there in red, located right next to a bunch of land that was previously used for forest or farming, but has now been transformed into gold mining pits. And as you can see on the left, the Pra River, located many kilometers downstream from the gold mining, is highly turbid, and the surface and groundwater is also heavily contaminated with heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and especially mercury. But it wasn't the water quality that we were there to test. We were investigating how communities are coping with these water challenges. Specifically, we interviewed pregnant and recently postpartum women, along with healthcare providers, to see how water intersects with maternal and child health. And if I can share a few insights from that project, the healthcare providers shared stories with us about delivering babies without clean water to wash their hands or to wash the surgical instruments. The mothers told us stories about long journeys to fetch water, about navigating risks from different sources for different uses for water. They even described stories of having to purchase water that was contaminated just to bathe. And when we asked the mothers whether they believed that their husbands had sufficient water to keep them healthy, they would often tell stories that their husbands only drink purified bottled water. And so while our research is about these stories and lived experiences, if we zoom out and we look at the relevance of water for maternal and child health on a bigger scale, we know that these are not isolated challenges. We know that preventable infections linked to unsafe births remains a major cause of maternal mortality globally, with over 1 million women dying from this cause each year. We also know that every 2 seconds, a woman gives birth in a healthcare facility without clean water, safe toilets, or adequate hygiene. And so, as our previous speakers also alluded to, the provision of water is not just about the reduction of morbidity and mortality. It also ensures that girls are not dropping out of school in order to go and fetch water for the family. And it's also about ensuring safety and dignity so that women are not giving birth without clean water at hand. And so as we now begin our discussion on how we can make progress towards achieving the fundamental human right to water, I'm looking forward to sort of discussing how we might better listen to and integrate the needs of women and girls. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you so much, Alexa. What a panel, eh? I think we're going to turn off the slides so that we don't have the lights in our eyes and you don't have that reflected on our glasses. But what we want to do is I have 3 kind of preformed questions, and I'm going to ask the panelists to reflect on those, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A, and then I'm going to reserve the last few minutes to ask them for some closing comments. So I'm going to start with a question which many of you reflected on already in your opening comments, which I think is interesting in and of itself, which is what key experiences or turning points led you into the research at the intersection of equity and water? And how have those turning points shaped your perspective on the issues you study? I'm going to start with you, Sheri.
Yeah, great question. This has been a really good exercise, too, to allow me to think back and begin to reflect on what are those key turning points. And from my own perspective and experiences, I go back to that first opportunity at Six Nations, when I worked at the Six Nations Land Research Office. And I didn't talk too much about the challenges we were having at Six Nations, but the water challenges that persist are embedded within this bigger context of land rights, of history, of culture, of shared responsibilities, of broken promises, racism. So all of these deep issues. And I didn't know it because I was raised in an area where we learned Western history. Grade 9 history was about all I wanted to learn because I learned about the savage Iroquois. I was like, those are my people. So going to work at Six Nations in my early mid-20s, then right out of university, working on lands and research, looking at our historical land base, mapping out land transactions, surrenders, deeds from original documents, just transformed me. It was a whole experience and knowledge I don't feel I would have ever gotten anywhere else. And then working with many of the cultural people, those that had the knowledge holders and keepers, and then having the opportunity to work with the clan mothers and having the opportunity then to had the supportive community to take on a joint stewardship position with the city of Hamilton on behalf of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So having that behind me at a time when I was thinking, you know what, is this a space I should be in? I'm not fully Native, and the joke was, well, hey, you got Haudenosaunee blood, you're one of us. So it was like, I think those really transformed how I approach my research now, and then seeing the challenges in First Nations, because then I was involved, people would call me and go, hey, I heard what you did down at this First Nation, can you come and set up our system? Chugging down the road here, I'm like 25 years old, getting in my car, driving, setting up these systems. Well, why don't you stay? And we'd work together. But just seeing the resilience and the challenges First Nations have to overcome for sustainable, self-determined, self-reliant communities. And to me, it was just appalling. But the joy in the people and the resilience and their ability to just persevere. And then I would come back and become humbled of what my research could possibly do that they haven't done already. Or then it switched how I looked at things. How can I be a vehicle for change or a conduit, because I was privileged to go to university and to sit here. So it's kind of in that space. That's something I could have never got from my textbook learning, as they say.
Yeah, that's a great
But bringing it together though,
Yeah.
now, and that's I think where many of us as Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, Indigenous Ongohowe people are entering the academies now. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And your thoughts reminded me of Stephanie Nixon's paper on the coin of privilege. If you've never read that paper, it's a great paper. Stephanie Nixon is now an associate vice president at Queen's University, trying to change the whole system. Alexa, you talked a little bit about the influence of your lived experiences in the field influencing you. What else influenced you?
I think over the years, I've had a lot of opportunities to engage with communities, and each time that I do, I walk away with a different understanding of water. Sometimes we go into a community already thinking that we know the answer, and then after speaking with people, we realize that they have the solutions already, and it's how they navigate and actually actualize those solutions. And so I think some of my early experiences in Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa brought me into research, but then each of the subsequent trips that I had and was able to engage with communities continued to shape me and allowed me to realize that I was on the right path. I also alluded to the fact that I work with a lot of engineers. I'm somehow the social scientist in the room with a lot of engineers a lot of the time, and I've actually really enjoyed that. I remember being in Ecuador one time when they were all doing surveys, and I went to talk to some of the people in the community, and they just told me these stories, like how they would paint some of the pipes because people would actually steal the fittings because they looked like gold or something valuable, and so they would actually design their own systems. And so some of those experiences speaking with the communities were most impactful and have continued to shape me as a water researcher.
I think I would say my live experiences. So I have a travel mark here. I didn't like it because my mom told me she was away to get water when they gave me that travel mark. And I grew up, or I was born and raised in the Upper West region, which is a socioeconomically vulnerable context. And because of this vulnerability or that context, I experienced several forms of inequalities like water insecurity, food poverty, and health access disparities. And that has informed me or shaped how I see water or approach my research. I must also highlight that I have sisters, and I didn't experience their wash space. But what I know is that by 4 a.m., those days they were out to get water from the well for us to bath. And there are times they had to fight to get this water or queue for so many hours to get this water for us to bath. Later along the line, we had a tap, but most times it wasn't flowing because the municipality decided when we get water and at what price sometimes, and the time, because most times it flows at midnight, so you have to stay awake to get water by 5, 6 a.m. The taps are not flowing. So these experiences and emotional relationalities shaped or informed my current research trajectory. Thank you.
So we had a question this morning. I was just looking for the gentleman who asked the question. But it was about, it was July 28th, 2010, when the UN declared water as a human right. And so how effective do you think that kind of rights-based situation, I got to check my notes now, how effective is something like that in terms of a rights-based approach to wash systems that centers women's leadership? What structural barriers still prevent women and equity-deserving groups from shaping wash decision-making, even though the UN declared it a human right so many years ago? I'm going to start with Abraham because you work with UNU.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think water as a human right based on equity shouldn't be political, but we've all seen the number of times politicians use water as a political tool to control populations or communities. Everyone involved should have access to water and be able to control how water is managed in their communities and sometimes in their households. So water as a human right should be centered for now or on women leading the process. Let me say this. If you look at the ministries across Africa, the whole of Africa, that are in charge of water management, only 17% of them are being managed by women or led by women. And if you also look at the transboundary water management in Africa, only 4 women are championing transboundary water management. When you look at the households, there are several experiences that women who are champions in WASH, like kind of leading community advocacy in WASH, are beaten because their husbands think they are being empowered to come and challenge their authority. So these are all challenges or limitations that are affecting women leadership in water. And we at UNU in WAY is a partner on the women advocacy on water at the UN. So we try to empower women to lead transboundary water management. And these women also serve as bridges between the national and the community level advocacy when it comes to water. Thank you.
It's so interesting that you say that, because our most recent experience, we were doing deliberative dialogue, so sharing research results in Kenya and Uganda about how to empower women in the context of unpaid care work, and that involves water, of course, and being warned by the men at the table, oh, we better not empower women too much, you're just going to increase domestic violence if you do that. Sheri, what do you think a rights-based approach can do for Indigenous peoples in Canada and in North America?
It's very interesting because, well, and I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples across Canada. We know there's over 600 nations, each diverse, unique, each with different structures, cultures, language, and governance systems. Overall, I'll say with respect to a rights-based approach, we don't see that exercised right now. When we have First Nations, as was alluded to this morning or mentioned to this morning, we have some First Nations that have been suffering with drinking water advisories for 3 generations or more, 25 years, going up on 30 years. And some that I've spoken to have some horrendous stories with respect to saying, I've never had safe water, my children don't, my grandchildren, like generations would share that. So we see that if human rights instruments are there and they're not being implemented, it's like sort of what good is a right if you can't exercise that right? Much like hunting and fishing rights, they say, if the water isn't safe or the fish can't be eaten. In terms of Indigenous peoples, though, there's instruments such as the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples that's likely have been a stronger instrument in conjunction with Indigenous peoples' rights under the Constitution as well, because those rights to Indigenous governance, Indigenous self-determination, because, for example, at Six Nations, as a matrilinear society, women are the knowledge keepers, the responsibility to take care of the water, but because of the colonial system of governance that was imposed, that was broken down to empower men and to really weaken women in society, or attempt to. So I think there's an important element, and we need to elevate that, and really need to ensure that those original agreements of nation to nation, non-interference, Indigenous nations asserting their rights to govern, to manage, to fulfill responsibilities for caretaking of water within traditional territories. That doesn't mean ownership. That doesn't mean removing third parties. That means working together, because that's part of the Great Law. That's part of Haudenosaunee teachings of what we need to do. So I think in doing that, by asserting, by enabling Indigenous rights and governance, then we can restore some of those traditional ways, or at least elevate women, and have some instruments to support that in law. Because right now, I mean, we see what's happening, and the status quo is not positive for First Nations in a drinking water sense. And then we need to think of holistically, right from source to tap to source. And that involves governance beyond what I think nations, between what Canada and provinces want to do right now, because there's fear. But I think that's what we need to do. I think the human right to water is great, but we need to be implementing it and hold our governments accountable at all levels.
Alexa, how would that work in the communities where you work in Ghana?
So I would say that I think that taking a rights-based approach starts with thinking about how we conceptualize water. There's an interesting paper by Jepson and colleagues that prompts us to think about water, not the human right to water, but the human right to water security. And in that paper, they talk about how water is more than a material resource. It's more than H2O. It's more than its volumetric properties. But if we're able to conceptualize water as a social phenomenon, as cultural, as political, then we start to understand the equity dimensions a little bit better. And so I like to sort of think of water instead of the human right to water, but the human right to water security. And that means that it's about more than drilling a borehole, because if women and girls can't access it after dark, is it really improving water security? You might be improving water, but not water security for all people. Similarly, if a water system is safely managed according to the JMP, but it is governed by cartels, is that really water security? So that's the conversation that I would have on the conversation on the right to water.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the broader audience. We talk a lot in the social sciences about co-production, co-creation. We're going to work with community partners to co-create a response, co-produce an initiative. We, I think, are still struggling a little bit with A, what that looks like, B, how to do it, and C, how to evaluate, did we do a good job or not? But I'm going to go in the reverse order this time. I'm going to ask Alexa first. Would that work in the communities within which you work, to co-produce interventions that would work towards continuing along that continuum of water security for the women in the communities within which you work?
Yeah, I think that there's various ways that your work can translate into change, and that occurs across different scales. So it could be working with a community partner, but on a broader scale, it could also be supporting policy initiatives. I know right now, for example, WaterAid Ghana has launched a campaign called Time to Deliver, and it's about ensuring that every woman everywhere has water during delivery. And so there's different levels that your research can translate into change, and sort of
working with NGOs very locally can work, but also some of these bigger ones that operate at larger scales that are able to get funding or get the attention of international actors can also be another way to have your research translated into change.
Yeah, so that was interesting. The take-home message for me is, yes, you can, but you do it in partnership.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The co-engage is where we need to be going, because I was saying from my experience, the knowledge is in community. I mean, not that our scholarly knowledge is not incredibly important at driving policy change, but to enhance that knowledge and working collaboratively and co-design through all stages of the process is so incredibly important. And I think a good starting point is ideally to look at some of these challenges as we are now from a systems approach, to come outside of perhaps our can be narrow disciplinary areas. That's why the Waterloo collaborative program is just amazing. Like, we take the challenge or the opportunity and look at how we can bring all of our knowledges together to create a new transformative path forward. And that could be Indigenous knowledge, that could be Western, that could be engineering, it could be all the public health. We all need to be there solving those. But if we're going to work with Indigenous communities and often extract that knowledge or gain from that knowledge, it needs to be co-designed, because we need to be creating a value. Often I'll say, what is the value proposition for me to go to that community and leverage my relationships over time to bring researchers in? What are they getting at it? When they're overstaffed, like the challenges, and then our academics questions become sometimes moot when we really see. It's not that they're not important, but we need to understand that context, and then really come in with a good mind, a humble heart, and a kind willingness to want to help and unlearn. Because we have some knowledge here, but the amount of knowledge in communities is amazing. That the resilience to be able to still be here despite every policy that was thrown at Indigenous people. And right now, I think the biggest challenge for us and the ways we can do that through water is developing economies, or we'll always be on this financial challenge. That's why I thought the speaker this morning was amazing. How do we do that? How do we do new finance models? How do we do these ways? And First Nations can't do it alone, nor are they seeking to. But we just have to do it in a way right from start to finish, where those mutual benefits are managed and shared along the way. And that's the spirit of the 2.0 wampum too, just working together, those ways of knowing and doing. And there was something else, but I forgot. Wonderful.
It'll come back.
I was about to share with you.
Abraham.
Thank you, Suzanne. Speaking from the policy perspective, I think communities should be given the opportunity to share knowledge. And you did very well during the Women Rights Project by engaging communities, sharing research findings with them to help define the problem, then also identify possible solutions. And we've all spoken about the SDGs, and I'm sure very soon we'll be done with the SDGs and something else will be launched. Are we engaging the communities? Should we always focus at the international level, and are national governments empowered to implement these policies? I don't think we are on track to even achieving SDG 6 or SDG 3, but yet we are going to launch international policies or framework to guide how communities, individuals, households, water or health are being shaped. Politicians, we should always hold them accountable. You've done a lot of wonderful research, which you have turned into policy, but are these followed? Are they shared? How do we interpret these findings so that the layperson will understand that when you talk about violence, it's actually a problem, but not a form of correcting them? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Abraham. So we're going to open it up to questions to this wonderful panel from all of you. I have a tethered mic, but you can come and share it with me if you have a question.
There's a hand there.
Oh, sorry. Yep. You got to come to the tethered mic.
Sorry, kind of an amorphous question. How does living in Canada and how does living in Canada and also knowing that Canadian companies are kind of the biggest player in global mining, and mining being one of the biggest water theft, all around bad time things, how does that influence your work, like being in the country that is also one of the biggest extractors of water and land globally?
I'm not sure how to directly answer that question. I think that, like especially after my last field season, it was definitely challenging seeing what I saw and coming back to Canada. That being said, for example, in Ghana, there were a lot of Canadian mines operating. However, they were operating large-scale mines, which are not as bad for the environment. So there's environmental remediation projects, et cetera. At the level that you're asking, like, I'm not sure how to comment on it. I can just say that I've seen the impacts of small-scale mining on communities, and from a personal human level, it's challenging work. But as to the Canadian role in it, I'm not like very familiar on that level.
So I would say too, the thing that's important to understand about the small-scale illegal gold mining is two things. I think, and we were chatting about this morning, Katie and I, it's politically and economically driven. You're talking about a country where there's like 60% unemployment in young men. So why stay in school if there's no jobs for me when I'm finished? And gold is everywhere. So you've got very independent young men just going out and digging up gold and crushing the rock. And in order to extract the rock or the gold from the rocks, they're using mercury. So that's the big issue, is the use of mercury. Mercury has no half-life, and it bioaccumulates in water and in fish and in crops, and then women consume it while they're pregnant, and it has tremendous birth defects, and it contaminates the water. And it, and who's heard of grassy narrows in Ontario, right? It's a big grassy narrows. But this is, and it's all happening very surreptitiously, right? And because of the political economic situation, it's pretty dangerous. Abraham talked about the DRC early this morning about the issues with the cobalt, but there's also a lot of gold in the DRC, right? So there's a lot of illegal gold mining in the DRC as well, where they're using mercury to extract the gold from the rock, and the people who control that are the rebel groups, and they're using the money that they make from the gold to buy weapons. So it's very hard to intervene in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add also is, again, it's happening at different scales. So at the global scale, we have this demand for gold, and in geopolitical conflict, the demand for gold goes up. So people are buying gold more and more, and so that puts pressure on the people who are there because the value of gold becomes higher. And like Susan just mentioned, these people have gold beneath their feet and they don't have any other opportunities, so they're engaging in the small scale mining. I visited some of the larger mines, and those are actually the jobs that people want to have. They're wearing the PPE, they don't use mercury, they're brought into air-conditioned lunch rooms and fed like good food every day. And so there is a juxtaposition between this small-scale mining that is causing really widespread environmental harm and some of the bigger organizations, which I can't speak to because I don't study that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a little to add on that some of those challenges we see globally, we have them as well in northern Canada, like the Ring of Fire. We did, with some colleagues at the University of Guelph, we did a grant, Global Minerals, Local Communities. We were doing comparative studies between Canada, mines in Canada, and mines in the Philippines to look at CSR. We were looking at, does corporate social responsibility result in benefits to community? And me being the only First Nations person, I'm like, well, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women report had come out not too long ago, and they had 7 or 9 calls to action for extractive industries, which related to women being involved in all levels of the life cycle of extractive of mine development. And with the Ring of Fire hot on our trails and the provincial planning policy, putting up, at that time, the Far North Act and legislation enabling, we knew what was happening. And then there's communities up there already struggling with safe source water. We looked at then women, the impact on women. So I had some students look at indigeneity and the intersection between women and impacts on mining. And just to see where the literature was to find that gap, because in Canada I was saying it's not CSR here, it's impact. There's different institutions driving those relationships here. But I heard in many of the other countries, corporate social responsibility does still have a bit of leverage to some degree, more than it did here in Canada. But we published a book on that, and it's open access. So if anybody wants it, I've got that chapter that me and my students wrote. And then there's others as well, some cases. We couldn't get out to community. It was during COVID. We did lockdown, and we're not going to go into First Nations communities at that time. But that might be helpful if anyone would like that.
Thanks, Sheri. Other questions?
My name is Benuja. I'm an undergrad student at the University of Waterloo in Environment and Business. I actually went with Alexa to Ghana last year for the Beyond Borders Field School, so if you guys have any questions, I can answer any of those. But my question is, so we're in an era of like global water bankruptcy, so a lot of the water systems now are not replenishing as they used to. Like I know there's some talk in Waterloo even that if the population grows here, in like 2 to 1 million, we won't have enough water systems to sustain the growing population. So there's some talk about new infrastructure and such. But my question is, there's talk about shared responsibility for water access. What does shared responsibility look like to you guys for students and people in this region and also abroad? Like how can we achieve shared responsibility for water?
Okay, I will go. So I think shared responsibility, to me, is not about experiencing water insecurity or facing it, but how we even frame it to our understanding. And I'll draw from the critical minerals report. Like I said, we all use smartphones, and we know that these phones we are using are kind of causing water insecurity in the global south. How do we as consumers even kind of serve as advocates for those back in global south? It's our shared responsibility to ensure water security even if we are not experiencing it. And let's scale down to the community level. Most times during borehole drilling, you might have experienced it in Ghana, the community leaders are consulted. But it should be a shared responsibility between these leaders who are most often men and women, because women are always in the forefront when it comes to water collection, and they know whether the borehole is functioning because they interact with the borehole. They know whether the water is good because they collect water. So it should also be a shared responsibility, and also between communities and institutions. So it could be at the local level, community, national level. Thank you.
One of the things I love about the University of Waterloo, I don't know how many of you read this email every day, but we get the daily bulletin every day. Everybody get the daily bulletin every day at Waterloo. And it tells you about, here's the big studies that came out from Waterloo this week. And there was one last week. I don't know if you saw it, but I don't know the details. I can't even remember the faculty or the department. But I remember the take-home message, which was the vast majority of e-waste that we throw out is still good. We don't throw out our iPhones because they don't work anymore. We throw out our iPhones because there's a new one, and we want the most up-to-date one. We want the fastest one. We want the fastest computer. So in terms of shared responsibility, there's actually quite a bit that we can do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the issue of co-management or shared management or like sharing the responsibility to address the problem. And in my mind, I'm like, does shared management not take away the responsibility from people who are actually responsible? Like the moment we say that this is a shared problem, then who is responsible for addressing this issue? Abraham provided a diagram where there was like micro level, the meso, and the macro. And I'm mostly focused on the macro level where we have the institutional and the policy people who are responsible for the overarching policies. From where I stand, I think that is where things should begin. They're the ones, that is the level where things begin to spring out to everybody else. But from your perspective, who do you think is directly responsible, and who is going to initiate co-management or this shared decision-making? And from places where you work in Kenya, I'm from Kenya, in Uganda, in Ghana, is there hope for this kind of issues? Because sometimes it feels hopeless. Thank you.
Okay, give me 1 minute to take you back. So let's use household latrines. it was the government responsibility to ensure that households were having latrines. So the late 1990s, government through Oxfam constructed latrines for rural households. And imagine living in a thatch house and your latrine is built with cement roofed, which is better than where you are sleeping. These communities were not using the latrines. They were rather storing their farm produce in the latrines because we were being given by the government. It was government responsibility to ensure that we don't defecate openly. Then, in the middle of 2000, Kamal Kal started the CLTS project, that community leading when it comes to their own sanitation. So trying to create kind of a collaboration between institutions and government. So their shared responsibility came in, because if you know why you constructed latrine, using your own resources, you will use it and maintain it. When it breaks down, you construct another latrine. So shared responsibility is not kind of shifting ownership, but redefining the problem so that it will be a collective problem. Thank you.
Yeah, that goes back to Katie's comment this morning about the collective, and I'm reflecting on this project that we're doing in Kenya on informal water vending. And so I had the chance to chat with some women who were informal water vendors and some men who were informal water vendors and ask them about their motivation. Why do you do what you do? And for the men, it was a profit motive, right? I do this because I can have a business, I can have my truck, my tanker truck, I can fill it with water, I can drive it around, sell my water, and I can make a profit. And I will never, as long as I live, forget talking to the women who said, we had a problem in our community. And I came together with my sisters and we talked about it, about how we could collectively solve this problem. Our problem was we had no water. So how can we collectively solve this problem? And I will never forget this woman who said, we came together and we pooled our resources, and within 6 months, we had $3,000 and we bore a well. We made a well in the community, so we had water. And not only that, we sold the water for much less money than the water company, but we sold it and we made a teeny tiny little profit, and we used that profit to have a micro lending facility so that we could give microloans to the women to start small businesses. So to me, that collective motivation, not that making a profit is a bad thing, but that the women were coming together collectively to solve a problem. So that's why I always go back to start with the women. So that's my alarm to tell me that I need to ask my final question so that everybody gets one more reflective piece before we go. And I like this question because it focuses on the hope. So what community, academic, or knowledge sharing strategies might we mobilize more effectively to support more equitable water governance and social change? And it says here I'm supposed to start with Alexa, so you have to go first.
Wow. Okay. I think my answer will be on the academics. For those in the room, you might be a graduate student, and I'm reflecting on my experience with water over the years. And it's that you're all brought into this room for a reason, probably because you're passionate about one part of water. And so something that we should mobilize, or that you should consider throughout your studies, is to look at different perspectives beyond your own, and allow that to inform how you approach water, and to follow what you're passionate about, instead of just the career or the outcome that way. So to follow your heart when it comes to water, and to not just stay within your discipline would be my approach. And with that, you can take that forward into improving water within the communities where you might end up working.
That was great. I think from my perspective, I would suggest continuing doing what you're doing and thinking critically. Thinking about the critical challenges ahead, and the roots to some of these systemic problems that have persisted and will continue to persist if we don't change our pathways. And there's many Indigenous teachings about the future and where we're entering now if we do not change our sort of economic view towards water as just being a commodity, but really looking at the spirit of water, looking at water and bringing the voice of water as an important element to the table beyond CO2, beyond H2O, and beyond what we can generate from that economically. And the other thing I was going to say is think critically about your own disciplines. Don't just take every literatures as the be-all to end-all. Think critically about ways in which we can begin to decolonize. And I'm going to say a lot of our colonial systems have led us, all of us, not just Indigenous peoples, but the ways in which where we are now that we've heard in terms of some of our economies and some of our mainstream approaches. So just think critically about them if there's an opportunity to enhance your own learning. I think that would be a way. And to support Indigenous peoples when there's opportunity and to learn. And there's so much going on here that you're so blessed to be at universities that's really just doing that now too, providing you all the opportunities that you can to learn and unlearn. And I was just going to say, the one thing I was going to say earlier was an example of what I forgot what I was going to say. There was a group that I'm working with, the Samson Cree out in southern Alberta. And they're just such an amazing group because they're a bunch of women who came together and that they said, we're going to take control over water. We're going to take our responsibilities back. And they came together and they put together a water committee. They inserted for funds to support. And there was a picture I had of the TP there. They invited us there to start our water research on wells and septics. And we had ceremony. We began it in a good way. And they're just amazing. And I'm promoting this, Noreen, across the country with Indigenous Affairs, with the Canadian Water Network, someone who's willing to share. And so, but we need, as academics, we need to come with our minds a little less open, I'll say, or less academic, being willing to make space for that new knowledge that can enter, that can enhance your knowledge and your research. So I guess that long way around is just being open and open your hearts and minds and be open to those opportunities when that knowledge comes your way. Thank you.
Okay, I would say as academics, we need to move beyond publication to translating our research into policy and engaging communities. This is not a UN language, but what is your publication in Nature? How would that benefit someone in my community if the person cannot read and write? But if we are all champions living here today and advocating or saying water insecurity is a major issue, I think that will be a collective voice and that will change policy. Thank you.
That's great, Abraham. We have a couple of minutes, and I've been kind of quiet once the panel started, but I'm going to answer this question for myself because I can't help myself. You heard the word humility and being humble, and I think that's what you were referring to also, Sheri, in your last comments, is being humble. So humility is one of the principles of the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research, which have actually been adopted by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, which is the National Granting Council for Health in Canada. And so we did put out a book. It's also open access, so you can get it. And it's a book that has chapters illustrating each of those principles and how they're used, case studies of how they're used. So they gave me the chapter on humility. I think they gave it to me because it was the hardest. And so I really had to think long and hard about what that meant to be humble as a researcher. Because when we write research grants, when we write those publications for Nature, we have to be the opposite of humble, right? We have to say, we're the best person in the world, and if you don't give me this money, the world's going to come to an end. My research is better than anybody else's. Give it to me, me, me. So I thought long and hard about that, and I came up with kind of 3 guiding principles of humility as a researcher, and then I'm going to give you a fundamental example. So my 3 things are: never go anywhere where you're not invited. It's very simple. Just be polite. Don't go into communities where you're not invited and nobody wants to partner with you. Secondly, recognize that every single person around you is smarter than you are. It doesn't matter if they can't read or write. It doesn't matter if they have a university degree. They're the knowledge keepers in those communities, and they know a lot more than you do. And the third thing is ask questions. Ask them in a very respectful way, because people want to share with you. So ask your questions in a very respectful way. My example is a few years ago, the International Development Research Centre, which is a funding agency in Canada for international research, was putting out a call for proposals for women building back better after COVID-19 in low and middle income countries. So I have partners in Kenya, I have partners in Uganda, I get them on a Zoom call and I say, hey, there's going to be this call for proposals. I can apply for $1 million, which in Canada is a big grant. I can apply for $1 million. Tell me what is the biggest problem that women in your communities had during COVID, and that's what I'll write the grant about. And if we're lucky, we'll get the money. And they both said, without hesitation and immediately, teenage pregnancy. I never would have guessed that in a million years. But I was being humble, being open, not going where I wasn't invited, and asking the questions in a respectful way. As a result, I wrote the grant, we got the money, we did some amazing research. But as Abraham pointed out, the other thing that we do is we share the results of the research. Because the other aspect of this is, I'm not an advocate, I'm a researcher. But I can advocate for the evidence. But the evidence has to be handed over to the partners in a way that they can understand and in a way that they can use. So we actually did several days of what we call deliberative dialogues in both of Kenya and Uganda with policymakers, community makers, saying, here's all the research results. Do they resonate with you? Do they mean anything to you? What can we do with these to affect policy and practice? And what's missing? What do you wish we had done that we didn't do? And that was the most profound experience, I think, of my life. It was absolutely incredible. Because those people in that room, whether they could read or write, or whether they had university degrees, or whether they were women leaders in the community, they were all smarter than I was. So my alarm went off for 3:25, and I have in my program something's going to happen at 3:25. Okay, so can we join in thanking our wonderful panel this afternoon?